Good afternoon. Welcome once again to our Ukraine War Q&A with Professor Michael Clarke. Professor Clarke, good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you all for being with us again, and thanks for submitting your questions as you do. As we always say, you can submit questions as we're going along. If you hear something from the professor that you want some more information about, or something occurs to you, and we will try and bring those questions up. You can submit them on our YouTube channel if you're watching there, or on the blog on our website, if that is where you're watching. So let's get started, Michael. It's the 7th of October today, as many people will know. It's also, I didn't realise this, it's Putin's birthday today. He was born on the 7th of October in 1952. He is 73. This first question here is about this. It's come from GMAC, who says they love the Q&As. Thank you for that, GMAC. We love doing them. It's Putin's birthday, and while he's not that old, he's no spring chicken. If he were to die, who are his most likely successors, and how hardline are they?
Well, I haven't sent him a card. I decided to impose my own sanctions, not send him a card this year.
Mine definitely got lost in the post.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, he's 73 today, and you're absolutely right. I mean, he's getting on like the rest of us, and he's regarded as not especially in great health, but he's robust enough. If he were removed immediately, or if something happened to him, who would take over? People ask this all the time. There's no obvious successor. There never is with a dictator, because they don't make anybody successor, because they are a threat. And the one thing we're sure about, or confident about, all previous handovers of power from Lenin onwards have created a period of uncertainty before somebody emerges. So Lenin died in 1924. It's 1927 before Stalin emerges. Stalin died in 1953. It's 1957 before Khrushchev emerges. Khrushchev's removed in 1964. It's 1966-7 before Brezhnev emerges. Brezhnev dies in 1982, and it's 1985 before Gorbachev emerges. So there's always 2 or 3 years interregnum with other leaders, and those leaders usually don't last because they've got no particular following.
The one that replaces the big man, it doesn't normally last.
Usually it hasn't done in the past. So normally we say, look, it'll be the one after next is the person that we'll probably have to deal with. Now, we don't know. We can be fairly sure. I mean, Putin would not be replaced by a nice man. He'd be replaced by somebody quite like him. The only thing we're absolutely certain about is it will be a man. Right? I mean, we're absolutely certain about that. So who are the candidates? Well, people get talked about all the time. So Medvedev, who has been president and prime minister, almost certainly not. I mean, he's outside the main scope, although he's got quite a high position on the National Security Council. He's not regarded as a real serious player.
He has a lot to say on social media.
He does, and he seems to have a drink problem, and he gets more and more violent in his language because he's trying to ingratiate himself with the inner circle. Mishustin, who's the present prime minister, again, probably is not strong enough. The people who they look at is Patrushev. I mean, Nikolai Patrushev is very much Putin's mentor. He's an intellectual mentor, and he has even more extreme views than Putin. Now, Patrushev is the same age, an old FSB man. So probably, Patrushev would be a nasty successor for a short period. But Patrushev's son, Patrushev is Nikolai Patrushev. His son is Dmitry, and his son is Minister of Agriculture, and he's a chip off the old block of a younger generation. So that's a possibility.
Interesting.
And then Sobyanin is, Sergei Sobyanin is the mayor of Moscow, who's got quite a big following, who was regarded as powerful with the oligarchs and so on. And Kiryenko, now he's an insider, again, Sergei Kiryenko, and he is the deputy chief of staff for the president. So he's on the president's staff. He's next door to the people who make all the decisions for the president. So he's very powerful. But I'd say my smart money is on, and again, it's just a guess, Alexei Dumin. Dumin, have you got him there?
No, I'm going to bring it. Right. Oh, yeah,
Dumin, 52. Dyumin. I call it Dumin. But he's the mayor of Tula, or the governor of Tula. The region. Now, he was on Putin's bodyguard. He's trusted by Putin, and he's in his mid-50s, I think.
Yeah, 52. Yeah,
52. Right. I thought I was going to guess 54. But, he's 52. He's regarded as a fixer, a doer. I mean, and he's been close to the centre of power. He's trusted by people as competent, and he might be a bit of a pragmatist.
Right.
But again, he's a very tough-minded man. And I don't think he would. The thing that would be different if Putin wasn't there is that the war in Ukraine is Putin's war. Right? It's Putin's personal war. Now, whoever would take over from Putin will certainly carry on the war, but they won't be so personally identified with it.
Right.
Putin is playing in this war for his place in Russian and world history. If he were removed tomorrow or by illness or something like that, then whoever succeeds him, for whatever interregnum period there might be, would not, we assume, feel so personally committed to the war, even if they went along with the same motivations that have driven Putin. So there might be something to work with in terms of a pragmatic result. And if it was clear that Russia was paying an enormous price, which it is, to pursue this war for pretty limited gains at the moment, then maybe a successor would say, look, we ought to review this. We ought to think about, how we're going to carry this forward. But that will not happen while Putin is there.
Just a little follow-up on that. Putin, when he began this war and in the years leading up to it, created this ahistorical narrative as the reason as to why he was going to do this. How much do those within his inner circle believe in that? How much are they like ideas men that are feeding into that? Or is it in some dictatorships, it's one person who has this idea and the rest of them kind of feed in?
No, I think you have a good point, Kamali, but I think it's more collective than that because this goes back 20-odd years now. I mean, Putin has been pushing this narrative since 1999. And the people around him have been fed this narrative. They've remade history. So there's all sorts of myths in this history that, that the West promised that not 1 inch, they wouldn't encroach not 1 inch after the Cold War boundaries. That was never said. It was a passing phrase of the American Secretary of State when he went to bed to Gorbachev, and suddenly the Russians made this into a doctrinal commitment. It was just, he said, how would you feel if we made a commitment about that? And then he went to bed, just left it with him as a thought. So there's lots of myths that they created. The idea that, the European Union had weaned Ukraine away in 2013, which is why they intervened in 2014. Well, no, it hadn't. I mean, the Russians had never objected to the European Union's relationship with Ukraine until 2013. Why did they object in 2013? Because there were street protests against Putin's apparent fixing of the elections at that stage.
Remember those, yeah.
2 years of street protests, and that coincided with Putin, as it were, creating a foreign policy crisis.
Well, there were colour revolutions going on in other places, weren't there, as well? It felt like there was a time for something.
So, I mean, they've reworked history. And the whole decision-making elite, and I think a lot of the oligarchs, now have an alternative view of history, certainly alternative to what the rest of us not just believe to be true, what we know to be true from our own records. Of course, there's scope for people to reinterpret or to interpret differently, but they actually invent quite a lot of facts which aren't there.
Yeah, it's interesting that they are all one of the same mind in that regard, and it's not just, you get rid of Putin and you're going to have a very different philosophy. They're all
the war is all about him because it's his war, but in another sense, he was tapping in to this growing Russian nationalism, imperialism that's been building up over the last 25 years.
Question here from Sheldon Moon. Is there a risk that Putin could be assassinated?
Not much, in the sense that his security is very, very tight, as you would imagine. And if he were assassinated, it would be from within the inner circle. I mean, it would be, somebody close to him. It'd be like it's the Julius Caesar outcome. One of his colleagues has got to somehow plunge the knife in, and you better succeed first time.
Absolutely.
If you think about Prigozhin, you remember the Prigozhin attempted
How can we forget?
coup.
The Wagner mutiny.
In 2023.
Yeah.
2023. Was an attempt at a putsch against Putin, and it didn't succeed. And that, we know what happened to Prigozhin. I mean, he didn't last many more weeks before he was met with an unfortunate accident.
It was an extraordinary thing because he was left, and it went a bit quiet. You thought he was maybe going to go back to running Wagner, and the next, he's playing.
A couple of months later, he's playing.
Playing just crashes.
He was killed along with a lot of his staff. But also, I mean, that was a typical Stalin's purge because a lot of generals who were actually pretty.
What do you call it? A Stalin's purge.
Sort of Vikin, remember?
What do you call it? A Stalin's purge.
A lot of Stalin's purges.
Purge, okay.
Just like that.
Yeah.
Were a lot of generals were sort of swept aside. So some of Russia's best generals actually fell as a result of apparent sympathy or the fact that they stood aside, sat on their hands while Prigozhin, conducted this apparent march on Moscow. So it was interesting. But no, I don't think Putin will be assassinated. But he is hypochondriac. I mean, he is a hypochondriac. There's lots of people think that he's suffering from Parkinson's disease. Some people think that they see evidence of that in the way he shakes and has to hold his hand carefully on the table.
Does, yeah.
Some think he's had a stroke of some sort, or that he's got thyroid problems. Some think he's got stomach cancer. But he's certainly hypochondriac. He certainly moves around with medical consultants on hand. He doesn't spend much time without talking to his medical consultant. And he's into alternative medicines of all sorts.
Is that right?
Exotic and alternative medicines, yeah. And he's a famous hypochondriac.
Well, later stages of Adolf Hitler as well. He was.
Oh yeah, he was
to his doctor, wasn't he? Taking all sorts of
wild
things, medicines.
You know, my doctor said to me, he said, "You're a hypochondriac." I said, "Oh God, not that as well." Ooh.
I love it. The gags from Michael Clarke. Just put one conspiracy theory to rest, or maybe not. People on the internet think that he's got a double. Have you ever seen this, and what do you think?
It's widely reported, yeah, because the length of his hair goes up and down. That they see him in one shot, and they see him on the front lines with troops with a slightly longer hair. And they think, oh, that was a quick growth in 24 hours.
Is it plausible they'd have a body double like that?
Oh, it's plausible. Yeah, it's plausible. I mean, I think a lot of people think that there's one or two body doubles. And it goes back partly to the COVID period, because he was so nervous at meeting people. You know, these absurdly long tables. And we know, again, the hypochondria in him. He didn't move out of his personal rooms for a long, long time. And he wouldn't come to meet anyone. One of the reasons that foreign leaders found him difficult to meet, because they required, before you could meet the boss, you had to have 2 weeks of COVID isolation before you'd be allowed into his presence. So a lot of meetings didn't happen. And yet he went and visited bits of the front line. When he talked to people, he shook their hands. You know, he embraced people. Well, that wasn't the same Putin that we saw in Moscow. Now, some of the people that he was shaking hands with on the front line turned out to be the same people. If you look at the videos, you see it's the same cast that moved around with him. So maybe they were all cleared. So, you know, troops on the front in the Mariupol area turned out to be the same troops.
Same generals, same lieutenants. It's interesting that you didn't completely knock it down. So that's fascinating.
No,
he may well be
a lot of people are firmly of the belief that there's at least one double of Putin around.
That he allows to be filmed and they use in like propaganda.
Yeah. But all those who take an interest in this thing, they look at the really careful details, like the length of his hair from one meeting to the next, and it's not consistent.
All right. Well, we'll keep a close eye on that. I'm sure the internet will as well. All right. Question here from Adam to give you a bit of historical context or reflection. Are we in now more danger that Putin's in charge of Russia of another world war or a nuclear war than during the Cold War, or specifically, Adam asked, during the Cuban Missile Crisis?
No. I think the danger is no greater than during the Cold War, when the danger was more of miscalculation than of deliberate acts. In the Cold War, we never came close to a deliberate act. But we came, and the closest we came was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a provocative maneuver by Khrushchev in Russia, not an illegal maneuver. I mean, what the Americans did in blockading Cuba was illegal, and what the Russians did, it just broke the rules. It broke the unspoken rules of the spheres of influence. But, I mean, that wasn't a crisis where the Russians were thinking seriously about launching a nuclear attack. And we've never had a crisis where the Americans have seriously thought about launching a nuclear attack, except, now think about it, General MacArthur in 1950 in the Korean War, when China intervened in Korea in December 1950, and through the United Nations forces led by America back, Douglas MacArthur, who was America's most famous Second World War general, said we should nuke China, and Truman removed him for saying that. But I mean, there was a top general speaking way out of his lane, you know, talking about national strategy and argued for that. So in a way, the only really explicit threat has ever been made by an American general, I suppose.
Yeah, and he had delusions of grandeur.
He did. Oh yeah, he was the emperor. He had an emperor complex.
He really did.
And because in Japan after 1940, he was treated like an emperor because he was the conqueror, and he got very used to it. But I mean, coming back to the original point, the dangers of the Cold War, nuclear in the Cold War, has always been danger of accident, of which there nearly was in Able Archer in 1983 that we talked about, or miscalculation, which there nearly was in Cuba on 2 or 3 occasions in the Cuba crisis of 1962. So I think the danger is now the same as it was then. It's the danger of reckless behaviour that creates an accident or that makes an accident worse, or behaviour which is just out of the blue dangerous for reasons that we can't imagine. You know, the great science fiction writer Terry Pratchett, right?
Yep.
Terry Pratchett. He famously said, the 1,000,000 to 1 chance happens 9 times out of 10. And you know, that's exactly right, because that's what an accident is, a series of 1,000,000 to 1 chances all happening together. Things that you would never imagine could all happen in the same moment or the same hour. And that's it. 1,000,000 to 1 chance happens 9 times out of 10. And that's what big accidents are.
Power of chance, isn't it? I mean, the other thing on the Cold War as well is that Cuban Missile Crisis, the US had those Saturn missiles in Turkey, and part of the deal was...
Jupiter missiles, yeah.
Jupiter missiles. They'd withdraw them, right?
They did eventually. Robert Kennedy said to the Russian ambassador, what was his name, Dobrynin, in Washington, he said, we will remove the Jupiter missiles, we will, but we're not going to say it, but we will do it. So they wouldn't allow the humiliation of saying that the Jupiter missiles will be removed. So they said, no, we're not going to remove them. And quietly they did.
But the point I'm making is that there was a
bargain.
Yeah, between the two. We don't have any.
And a lot of it was going on behind the scenes. So the Kennedy and Khrushchev were communicating with each other through statements and press releases. And Robert Kennedy was communicating with Dobrynin in the embassy. And Scaly and Fomin, an American journalist called Scaly, was communicating with a KGB man who pretended to be a businessman at a restaurant in Washington.
Right.
And they were so there were 3 levels of communication were going on. And even then, they had a tendency to misunderstand each other. Yeah,
absolutely. It was. There's a great book. I think it's 13 Days, isn't it? There's
Robert Kennedy's book, 13 Days. Do you know on the worst day, the biggest day was the Saturday, which I think was the 26th of October 1962, the Saturday, and that was the Saturday that the Americans thought that it was going to fail, and a nuclear attack was almost certain.
Wow! And
in Britain, it was not known until the 2010s. In Britain, we had all our V-bomber force on alert.
Really?
Yep. We had 4 squadrons of 10 bombers each at 4 stations, and they were on 15-minute alert.
And what would have been our response? Sorry, this is tangential, but it's interesting. What would have been our response had something have begun?
Well, the view was that a nuclear war might break out that night or the following morning, and we had to get our bombers off the ground before they could be hit.
Right.
To retaliate.
Had to be in the air to be ready.
And they were. I mean, there's a man called Group Captain Peter West, who was on TV in about 2012, 2013, and he said he was one of those pilots, and he said he was pulled in that morning. You know, an MP at the door. They don't make phone calls about these. The MP at the door said, "You're wanted, sir," and you're on alert. And so he picked up his grab bag, which he kept for these occasions, and he said to his wife, he said he went and looked at his two children in bed, and he said to his wife, "If you hear us take off, put the kids in the car, drive to your mother's in Scotland, and don't let anything stop you." Wowee. And he went and he sat in his Vulcan bomber at 15. Well, he sat on alert at 15 minutes alert, and in the middle of the afternoon they put on 5-minute alert, where they sat in their bombers with the engines running until they were stood down. Now nobody knew at the time, but that's how frightened everybody was on that Saturday. And then on a Sunday morning, suddenly Khrushchev's response came through to a series of communications, and the whole thing suddenly, like air in a balloon, it went down. And the decision makers in Washington, they were, I think Michael Dobbs, the great writer Michael Dobbs, he had a great phrase. He said they made decisions by the power of exhaustion. Wow. By then they were incapable of serious thought. They'd 13 days, almost no sleep. And he said they made decisions by the power of sheer exhaustion. And like air in a balloon, the whole thing suddenly came down. And Khrushchev lost. Kennedy was very lucky. And that Khrushchev backed down and lost face, and therefore lost power because of it. 2 years later, he was out because of that. And the Americans did what they said they wouldn't do. They removed the Jupiter missiles from Turkey, but quietly later on when everybody was looking the other way.
So interesting. That's how close it was. All right, let's move on back to today. Brilliant, Michael. We're still waiting on a decision on Tomahawks from the United States. A question here from Kian. Moscow's said that Tomahawk missile use in Ukraine is impossible without US personnel. Is that true? And would the US need to send operators to Ukraine? And would this count as direct involvement? Or could the Ukrainians actually just operate the Tomahawks?
Yeah, I mean, no to all of those, I think. Okay. I mean, they can be operated without American personnel. I mean, there might be some American personnel involved in maintenance of Tomahawks, but that can be done in Poland, even if that's required. But, I mean, Tomahawk missiles are missiles. I mean, we operate them. The United Kingdom operates them quite happily from our submarines, and we can carry them from aircraft, although generally speaking we don't, but we use them on our submarines, and they're available excuse me, if we want them on some of our surface ships. So no, I mean it's a closed weapon system. When you've got the weapon, there it is. There's the way you program it. Now, American help in programming targeting goes on all the time,
Yes.
so that's no different. But if Tomahawks were used by the Ukrainians, does that mean American personnel in Ukraine? No, it doesn't at all. But the Russians are saying that. Peskov said it about 10 days ago now, in order to frighten the West, as usual, to say if Tomahawks were used, we would assume that Americans are therefore operating in Ukraine. We would therefore assume that Americans are part of the war. And of course, what he's trying to do is frighten the Republicans in Washington to say, don't do this.
We made this point last week, didn't we? They're helping with the targeting, which they've been doing anyway. But just on weapons system that would need US personnel to operate, are there such systems that would be needed?
No, I mean Patriots operate. I mean, you have to be trained on them. So I mean, American
But training doesn't mean you've got people on the ground, does it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, training can be done in Poland or anywhere else. Can be done in the United States. Pretty well all the systems that the Ukrainians operate are independently operated.
Well, that's why how the Americans are able to sell them to other countries.
We should, however, acknowledge that it is believed that quite a number of special forces from Western countries are operating in Ukraine to help the Ukrainians, and that's been, we never confirm nor deny that's our UK policy. But I mean, Germany revealed inadvertently that, as always, can't keep a secret, that British special forces were operating in Ukraine, and the Russians said, "You see, proves it," and it does. Of course they are. I mean, that's what they do.
I mean, there's a great New York Times long read on exactly this and on our involvement that goes through the Ramstein base and the special forces that I recommend anyone trying to find if you want to get some of those details.
It would be odd if they weren't. In this exactly the same way that a lot of Russian special forces are operating in Ukraine themselves. They're looking for these supply lines. They're looking for sources of weapons, and they've been successful a couple of times. I mean, they've picked off a couple of big weapons stocks and convoys on their way in, and so they've had some success. And their own special forces, of course, operate inside Ukraine. It's part of the war.
Question here from Ukraine fan, and I've been wondering this as well, so I'll be interested in your answer. How is Ukraine able to keep their weapons manufacturing plants from being bombed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, partly by dispersal, because it's a physically big country.
Is that right? So they just move.
They can move them around, and they try and produce components, in different places. Yep. But also they can defend them, and so as always, they have to choose with their diminishing stocks of air defence missiles at the moment, which are their most important sites. So they want to protect the centre of Kyiv. They want to protect all the heritage of Kyiv, all the churches and cathedrals, which are fabulous. But they also have key areas in the military complex that they want to defend. So some of them can be defended. Many of them are underground, many of them are dispersed.
Right.
But it's a constant game. Of course it's a constant game. And equally, I mean, the Russians have got this big, enormous factory that we've talked about before in Tatarstan at Alabuga. And that's a massive target. It's a long way away. But I mean, you can bet your life the Ukrainians have targeted it, and that's a big target for them. Really? If they could target it consistently enough to hamper its production, they certainly would. They will try.
But it's too far away, because I've been watching my World War II history recently as well, and Stalin moving all his factories all the way far to the east, so the Nazis couldn't get anywhere near them.
Move them out of the way.
Just move them all the way back. Yeah. Now Lviv was hit in the past couple of days, which is a city way in the west. Which does that tell us anything? I mean, I was kind of interested, because I was like, Lviv now.
Really? It's been hit a few times before. I mean, it's been hit quite heavily 3 or 4 times before. And there's a little bit of production believed to go on around Lviv, and the Russians may think a great deal more goes on around there. I don't know if that's true. But, I mean, and also they hit Lviv to indicate, in a sense, that they know where it's safe.
Hit the whole country, Okay, away from the battlefield then. A question here about sanctions and pressure by the West. David MCL asks, is there one significant sanction that could be applied to Russia that would make the real difference in this war?
Well, Russia is now the most heavily sanctioned country in the world, and that goes back to 2014. Sanctions have been building up since then. And the European Union is on its 19th round of sanctions. More companies, more individuals, more facilities that they sanction. And as we've said before, you have to keep chasing sanctions, because the side that's subject to sanctions find ways around it and ways of evading it. So you have to keep blocking all the loopholes. So that's been happening. And in a way, it's hard to find a single source of sanction that would make a difference to Russia directly. But the two things that would make a difference, one is secondary sanctions on those who trade with Russia. And so you're looking there, India, China, Turkey,
Well,
some of the stands.
He put the sanctions on India. He hasn't done them on China yet, has he?
No, none. That's the point. I mean, President Trump imposed 25% sanctions on India, with a 50% sanction in total, but 25% of that is as secondary sanction for their trade with Russia, but none on China because he's in the throes of this big America-China deal, and he's got lots of other issues with China. And the Chinese have shown since the sanction war started that they've got more levers that they can pull against America than America have got against China. I mean, Trump is not in a dominant position with China. He's suddenly discovering the hard way that the Chinese have got lots of levers they can pull, and believe me, they're pulling them. So he's not going to do that. So secondary sanctions would have an effect on Russia. And the other thing, going back to what we talked about before, are energy prices. So gas and oil prices. So here we are.
Yep.
Our favourite.
I'm bringing it. You keep talking while I find the
Brent
numbers.
crude and our West Texas Intermediate. That's our favourite.
There we go.
The WTI, the slightly lighter oil. Now those give us the range.
Let's have a look.
And I haven't looked this week actually, but 61, 62.
61.75 for WTI.
61, okay, that's what I thought. 61, 62. Yep. At that level, the Russians are still making money out of selling oil. But if they fell to 50, then they'd be losing a fair bit of money. I mean, they just wouldn't be making the money. They wouldn't be getting the revenue. So oil and gas prices are the most critical single lever on pressure on Russia. And secondary sanctions would pressure them in a different way. But secondary sanctions are a difficult thing to operate and have lots of other side effects.
We've had a good question come in on the live chat from Martin Georgiev. Thank you for this one, Martin. And it's on this. It's not on sanctions, but it's on hitting their production. Can Ukrainian strikes on Russians' fuel processing capacity knock out their ability to continue this war?
No. I mean, it goes back to the argument between the Royal Air Force and the United States Air Force in the Second World War. The USAF wanted to go for strategic targets, petrol.
Yep.
And the wells in Romania, the Ploesti oil fields in Romania, which they did successfully. And the RAF always argued, they say, it doesn't matter. You can starve the German war machine of oil. The front line will still get it, even if civilians can't get petrol. The front line will always get it, and that's the case with Russia. If oil and diesel and petrol go short, the front line will still get it. That's first priority.
But could the social unrest that would be...
Yeah, that's the point. And that is happening. So petrol is going short domestically now, as we speak. The Ukrainians have attacked more than half of the oil refineries. I think it's about 38 refineries, and they've attacked something like 20 of them now, fairly repeatedly and quite successfully.
17% of their capacity has been taken out.
That's right. That's right. And they're also taking out diesel and lubricants. Those are very important. And they're just the Russians are just at the stage now, this side of the winter, where they turn over from producing light fuels to heavy fuels for the winter. Winter fuels are different in a country like that. And their turnover process, which goes on about this time in September, is in chaos, apparently. Absolute chaos.
Interesting.
So there will be diesel shortages. And diesel shortages, I mean, petrol shortages have an effect on the population. They queue at petrol stations. And Crimea is very short of petrol. That annoys people a lot. But diesel shortages are more important because diesel is what powers transport, factories, food processing. Really important.
Interesting.
Really important. And in some areas in the south, in Rostov, has declared a food emergency because the harvest hasn't done very well this year. The harvest, they had a really good harvest the year before last, the Russians, really lucky. It's not so good last year and not very good this year. The harvest is 20% down. And in Rostov, they've declared a food emergency. If they have problems now with their machinery, for food processing, then they've got a real problem. And that may occur across different Russian regions. Lubricants and diesel will be a bigger problem to them industrially than petrol.
It will be fascinating to see how they respond to that.
It won't win the war for Ukraine, but it will bring home to Russia the reality of the war to the Russian people, over the winter. And possibly, it will create a sort of, it will depress the economy into next year, which is staggering for other reasons as well.
Yeah.
So it is effective, but it won't directly affect the front line because the front line will always get the fuel, the ammunition and the food that they need.
Very interesting. All right, a couple more questions before we wrap up this week, Michael. This one from Osiris, who writes, long-time reader, first-time messenger. Thank you. Osiris, thanks for being with us through these past few months. And they ask, why hasn't anything been ramped up from the West since that meeting between POTUS and Putin in Alaska. Was that a waste of time?
Yeah, POTUS, we should say, is President of the United
There you
States.
go.
POTUS.
There you go.
FLOTUS
These
is
guys
the First
know.
Lady of the United States. I mean, it sounds awful, doesn't it? POTUS and FLOTUS.
Michael, they're informed viewers. And they're not SCOTUSes as well. They're
Thames Water talks about. Anyway,
was that meeting a waste of time? Osiris asked, why hasn't POTUS applied for more sanction pressure? We just went through that. And why hasn't he tried to call Putin again?
Yeah, because President Trump is zigzagging out of the war.
He's trying to get himself away from it.
He just wants to get away from it. Now, he might just come back. I mean, if the Gaza peace plan doesn't work out, and I don't think it's going to, he might suddenly start to take an interest again in Ukraine. But I suspect that's unlikely. Everything that President Trump has said since the Alaska summit indicates that he wants to get out. And he's saying, I will take more secondary sanctions against Russia when the Europeans stop buying oil from Russia. Right? Yeah. And it's true. The Europeans are no new contracts will be allowed from January next year, and Europe will be completely without Russian oil in 2028. But at the moment, a certain amount of Russian oil comes in and goes exclusively to Hungary and Slovakia, the two Putin clients in Europe. The Czech Republic has stopped taking Russian oil now. So some comes in through the, what's it called? I've forgotten the name of the pipeline now. But anyway, it comes in through the big pipeline from Siberia.
No, not Nord Stream. Not Nord Stream.
No, not Nord Stream. It's further south.
Okay.
Is it the Drozhba pipeline?
I'll
have to check it out. But it's the big pipeline that comes in through Ukraine, this pipeline, and then there's a northern route which doesn't supply anybody, and a southern route which supplies now specifically Hungary and Slovakia, who are reluctant to stop, but according to EU rules.
Druzhba pipeline.
Thank you, Druzhba. That's right, Druzhba pipeline. Well done. So the Druzhba pipeline is supplying some oil, and it will do until 2028 under present rules. And so President Trump says, well, I'll take sanctions when you stop buying oil. That gives him till 2028. So, he's out of it, basically.
Right.
And the Alaska summit, I think, was the final throw because it was such a crazy event.
That was mad. Red carpet, flyovers, F-35s, handshakes, hugs. It was
exactly, and the red carpet for Putin. And the Russians went away from that feeling, well, we're in control. And so the Russians are still pursuing this three-pronged policy, which they may not succeed in, but the first prong is continue the war because they want to. Second prong is maintain a strategic relationship with America, to normalize relationship with America, which they could never have done under Joe Biden or Obama or Bill Clinton, anybody before Trump. You can't normalize relations after what they've done, but they think they can. That's the second prong. And the third prong is that by doing that, the transatlantic relationship will get worse. They'll split America from the European allies, which at the moment is happening. So Russia has realistic hopes that they can continue their three-pronged advantage and that Trump will let them do that because he's lost interest.
It's interesting, though, to his credit, his rhetoric has hardened in recent weeks. I'm sure you will admit that. And he has said, as long as the Europeans are buying our weapons, you can give them what you like.
That's
so
right. Well,
in that way, he is supportive of Ukraine, which is different to where he was.
Ukraine, a few months
ago.
We've said, what could the United States do to reverse the political dynamics behind this war? And we've always said the best thing they could do is supply Ukrainians with the weapons that they need. Not so much it's the sanctions on Russia; it's Ukraine's ability to push the Russians back. If the Russians found that they were being pushed back from these positions that they've taken, 2 years, 3 years now to establish and lost over 1 million troops in doing, if they were losing that territory in some quite big chunks, they'd become much keener on a ceasefire.
Interesting.
But while that isn't happening, they'll carry on because Putin doesn't care about the losses. No. I mean, the losses can mount up from his point of view. He doesn't care.
Right.
On his birthday.
I'm glad you said it because I was about to. Final question here from Minrich. I hope I've said that right. Why do Britain and other states tell Russia which weapons they intend to give to Ukraine, giving Russia that information? Surely they know Russia sees all the media coverage. Why do they do that? Is anything kept secret?
Oh, a lot is kept secret in terms of the sort of things we've talked about, the intelligence cooperation, and testing out new things and some new weapons, like some of the laser weapons that we're talking about are being tested and so on. Yeah. And the Ukrainians have got a lot of innovation in drone warfare, They're ahead of the Russians in drone innovation, but not in production. The Russians can produce more than the Ukraine can, but they can't innovate as fast. So there is quite a lot that's secret. But in terms of the big systems, I know what you mean. We say we're going to give F-16s, and then we talk about the numbers, and I go on TV and say, it looks as if they've got about 60 and so on. I mean, the Russians know anyway. I mean, they know.
There's no military advantage in them knowing.
Yeah, there's no particular advantage. I mean, and the advantage to the West is to encourage people in Ukraine to indicate political support. So it's pros and cons, but it's not all it can't all be a secret process. And if it was all secret, there'd be a sense that the West is either not doing enough or doing too much, or there'd be conspiracy theories. So as far as possible, it's better to be transparent, apart from those things that have to be secret. And it's like when you talk to intelligence chiefs, they say, SIS, which is MI6, is Secret Intelligence Service, and say there are reasons why everything we do, in principle, is secret. And there are reasons for that, and they're very good reasons.
Yeah. Keep it to ourselves. Michael, always a pleasure. Thank you for that. And thank you all for submitting your questions. We're going to stop there for this week, but we'll be back with you very, very soon for another Ukraine War Q&A. Once again, thank you, Michael, and thank you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon.